I saved the seats for family, my mother-in-law said. Then she glanced at my husband's ex-wife sitting beside him. You're not. That was how Judith chose to welcome me to her 70th birthday dinner. I was standing just inside the private dining room at a restaurant in Blue Ash, still holding her gift in both hands like an idiot. It was 6:38 on a Saturday evening. I remember the time because I had checked my phone in the parking lot before walking in. I'd almost stayed in the car. There were maybe 30 people in the room. Gold napkins, cream tablecloths, a big number 70 in the middle of the dessert table. Somebody had brought a sheet cake with white icing and little gold sugar beads around the edge. There were wine glasses already filled, dinner rolls and baskets, and place cards lined up neatly in front of every chair. Every chair except mine. Daniel's ex-wife, Melissa, was sitting right beside him. Not across from him. Not somewhere down the table beside him. She had a printed place card. So did Daniel's sister Rachel. So did Evan, Daniel and Melissa's son. So did Judith's next-door neighbor, who I'd met exactly twice, and once called me Carolyn. Even a young man I didn't recognize had a seat. I found out later he was Rachel's daughter's boyfriend. I apparently had not made the cut. The strange part was that Judith had called me herself 3 weeks earlier.
Not Daniel, me.
I was at my desk at work finishing payroll when my phone rang.
Caroline, she said.
The way she said my name made me suspicious immediately. Judith usually said my name only when she was correcting me or asking why Daniel hadn't called her back. I'm turning 70, she continued. I'm tired of all this nonsense between us. I nearly asked which nonsense she meant. There was enough to choose from. Instead, I said, all right. She paused. Please come to dinner. Let's end this. That caught me off guard. For 4 years, Judith and I had managed a relationship best described as technically nonviolent. We didn't scream at each other. We didn't throw things. We just stopped pretending. I avoided family dinners when I could. Judith excluded me when she could do it without looking too obvious. Daniel floated between us, saying things like, you both need to move on, which was very convenient for the person who wasn't being moved around. When I told Daniel about Judith's invitation, he looked genuinely hopeful. Maybe she finally means it. I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting mail. Your mother once mailed back the Christmas centerpiece I sent her because she said the pine cones looked artificial.
Daniel looked at me.
They were artificial. That wasn't the point. He laughed. I did, too. That was part of why I went. After 8 years of marriage, you get tired of carrying the same family argument around like a grocery bag nobody else will take from you. I thought maybe 70 had softened Judith or tired her out. I would have accepted either. So I bought flowers, nothing ridiculous. A nice arrangement from a florist near Montgomery Road. And I brought the gift. That part mattered. The box was small cream-colored with a pale gray ribbon. Inside, under tissue paper, was an envelope containing paperwork Judith had wanted for more than a year. I'd spent several nights debating whether to give it to her. In the end, I decided I would. I told myself that if Judith was willing to make peace, I could meet her halfway. That was what I was thinking when I walked into the restaurant and found my husband's ex-wife in what should have been my seat. Melissa looked almost as uncomfortable as I felt. She had always been early to everything. Daniel once told me that during their marriage, Judith considered arriving on time a sign of poor planning. Apparently, that habit stuck. When I came in, Melissa's eyes flicked toward me, then toward Judith. That should have told me something. At the time, I assumed she was embarrassed because she was sitting beside Daniel. Judith came toward me wearing a dark blue dress and a silver necklace that Robert had given her years ago. She looked beautiful, actually. 70s suited her. She kissed my cheek lightly, as though we were people who did that. You came. You asked me to. Then I looked around again. I thought maybe there was another table. Maybe someone was bringing a chair. Maybe I had misunderstood. Where am I sitting? Judith didn't hesitate. That told me more than the answer did. I saved the seats for family. A few people nearby went quiet. She looked directly at me. You're not. Nobody said anything for a second. It's amazing how interesting a bread basket becomes when grown adults don't want to get involved. Rachel looked down at her napkin. Evan shifted in his chair. Melissa looked openly horrified. Then I looked at Daniel. That was the moment I cared about. not Judith.
Daniel?
He knew me well enough to see I wasn't going to yell. I almost never yelled. He also knew his mother well enough to understand exactly what she had just done. I waited. All he had to say was, "Mom, that's enough." 5 words. Instead, he sighed. "Caroline, please, not tonight." I stared at him. Not tonight. Like I had arrived carrying the problem. Like I was the one holding everyone hostage with a chair. I looked down at the gift in my hands, that neat little box I had spent half an hour wrapping because I wanted the evening to mean something. And suddenly the whole thing felt absurd. I smiled. Not because I was amused, because sometimes a smile is the only thing standing between you and saying something you'll have to apologize for later. All right. Judith seemed surprised. I picked up my purse from where I'd set it against the wall. Then I lifted the birthday gift slightly. Then I guess this doesn't belong here either. Daniel stood.
Caroline.
No, it's fine. And for once, I meant that in the opposite way people usually mean it. I turned and walked out. I had almost reached the elevators when I heard heels behind me. Fast heels.
Caroline.
I stopped. Judith came hurrying into the hallway, breathing harder than she wanted me to notice. For one foolish second, I thought she might apologize. I really did. Then her eyes dropped to the gift box in my hands. What's in there? That was when I understood. She hadn't chased me because I was leaving. She chased me because my gift was something from somebody who apparently isn't family, I said. Judith's face tightened. Caroline, don't be childish. The elevator doors opened behind me. I stepped inside. She reached for the edge of the gift box. Not hard enough to snatch it, but enough to make the point. I pulled it back.
Good night, Judith.
The door slid shut between us. I didn't realize until I got downstairs that my hands were shaking. Not dramatically, not enough to drop anything. Just that annoying little tremor you get when your body is angrier than you're allowing yourself to be. I stood in the lobby for a minute pretending to read a framed menu from the restaurant. Then I went outside. Daniel caught up with me in the parking lot.
Caroline.
I kept walking. Caroline, wait. I stopped beside my car. He looked irritated. That was the first thing I noticed. Not embarrassed, not sorry, irritated. You just walked out of my mother's 70th birthday.
I stared at him.
Your mother invited your wife to dinner and forgot the radical detail of giving her a chair. She didn't forget. I gave him a look. Daniel rubbed a hand over his forehead. That's not what I meant. I mean, there would have been somewhere for you to sit. There are sentences that reveal more than arguments do. That was one of them. There would have been somewhere.
Yes.
I nodded slowly. That may be the saddest thing you've ever said to me. He looked away. Can we not do this in the parking lot? I almost laughed. We had apparently reached the stage of marriage where location was the problem. I unlocked my car. Go back inside. Caroline, your mother is 70. Don't ruin her night. He flinched because I used his own line back on him. I got in and drove home alone. The trip from Blue Ash to our house took a little over 20 minutes. I don't remember the radio. I remember traffic lights. I remember sitting at one red light on Kenwood Road thinking, we have been doing this for 4 years. Not one dramatic feud, not one giant blow-up. Just 4 years of little things that Daniel kept asking me not to make bigger. The first real fight had started over money, not a fortune, nothing exciting. Daniel and I had combined most of our household finances after we got married, but we kept a separate emergency savings account for major repairs, medical deductibles, that sort of thing. Judith had always been unusually involved in Daniel's finances before our marriage. She knew what he earned, what he owed, what he spent on cars. She once asked me what our mortgage payment was before I'd even told my own sister. One afternoon about 4 years ago, she called and said Daniel should add her as an authorized user on one of our accounts. I thought I'd misunderstood.
Why?
In case something happens. To both of us. She went quiet. Then she said, I've always helped Daniel with these things. I said, I know, but we're handling it now. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Judith heard, you are no longer important. What I said was, no, thank you. Those are very different sentences, but in families, people often hear the one they're afraid of. After that, I started disappearing from things. Not literally, socially. At Christmas, Judith handed me her phone and asked me to take the family photo in front of the fireplace. I took 3. She looked at the third and said, "Perfect. Everybody's in it." I wasn't. Daniel laughed awkwardly. I waited for him to say something. He didn't. At brunch one spring, I found out Melissa had been invited because, as Judith explained later, she's Evan's mother. I hadn't been invited because Judith assumed I was working. I wasn't. Nobody had asked. Every time I brought something up, Daniel gave me the same response. "That's just Mom." That phrase became a kind of family weather report. Judith insults you. That's just Mom. Judith excludes you. That's just Mom. Judith asks your husband's ex-wife to sit beside him while you stand in the doorway. Apparently still Mom. Eventually, I stopped going to some things. It was easier. That was what I told myself. Robert was different. Daniel's father had a way of making ordinary conversations feel useful. He never fussed over people. He just noticed things. Every once in a while, he'd stop by my office around lunchtime with 2 coffees. He knew I worked through lunch more often than I should. One afternoon, maybe 6 months before he died, he sat across from my desk while I finished a payroll report. He said, "Judith thinks family means whoever agrees with her last." I looked up. "That sounds dangerous." He smiled.
It's exhausting.
Then he got serious.
Don't let her teach you that.
At the time, I thought he was talking generally. After he died, I learned he wasn't. Susan Feldman called me about 6 weeks after the funeral. I assumed it was paperwork involving Daniel. Instead, she asked if I could come to her office. Robert had placed his 25% share of the Lake Cumberland cabin into a trust, and he had named me trustee. I remember sitting across from Susan and saying, "Are you sure?" She looked at the document. "Very, why me?" Susan folded her hands. "Robert believed you'd hesitate. That doesn't sound flattering."
It was.
The cabin had been in the Hayes family for nearly 30 years. Not a mansion. 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 downstairs. Old deck dock that always needed something repaired. But every family memory seemed attached to that place. Robert didn't want Judith selling his share the minute he was gone. His instructions were simple. If Judith truly intended to keep the cabin for family use, I could transfer his share to her. If she planned to sell, his share stayed protected for the grandchildren. There was one line Robert had written himself. Susan showed it to me. "Don't use this to punish anyone. Use it to protect what I meant it to protect." That line bothered me because it required me to behave better than I sometimes felt. For over a year, Judith pushed me. "When are you releasing Robert's share?" "When I know what you plan to do with the cabin, I already told you." "No, you avoided the question."
She hated that.
12 days before her birthday, she finally sent me a written statement. She said she wanted the cabin kept in the family. No sale, no listing, no changes. I read it twice. Then I called Susan and told her I was ready to proceed. Maybe that was naive. I don't know. I wanted the argument finished. I wanted Daniel to stop looking tired every time his mother's name came up. I wanted Judith to have one less reason to treat me like an intruder. So, I signed the necessary papers. The transfer wasn't completed yet, but it was ready to move forward. And I put it in a gift box for her 70th birthday. At home that night, I placed the box on the desk in our spare bedroom. At 9:12, my phone rang. "Judith," I answered. No hello, no apology. Was that Robert's paperwork in the box? I sat down on the edge of the bed. "Good night, Judith." "Caroline." I hung up. Then I looked at my screen. 6 missed calls from Daniel. The front door opened about an hour later. He came in, dropped his keys in the bowl by the entryway, and found me in the kitchen. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He said, "You can't hold Mom's cabin paperwork over her because of tonight." I just looked at him because I had never told Daniel what was inside that box. "How did you know?" Daniel stopped halfway through taking off his jacket.
"What?"
"You heard me." He looked tired, which irritated me more than it should have. Somehow he had spent the evening at his mother's birthday party and come home looking like the injured party. I just assumed he said, "No, you didn't, Caroline." "What was in the box?" he exhaled. I waited. Daniel was never good at silence. Give him 10 quiet seconds, and he would start filling them with things he later wished he had kept to himself. Finally, he said, "Melissa texted me." That wasn't the answer I expected. When this afternoon about what he looked toward the sink. That was when my stomach started to sink too. Daniel, she got there early. I know Melissa got there early. She saw Mom moving some things around. What things he didn't answer quickly enough. I held out my hand. "Give me your phone."
He looked at me.
No, that surprised me. Not because I thought spouses should automatically hand over their phones whenever asked. I don't. But Daniel and I had never been secretive with each other. "I'm not asking to search your life," I said. "I'm asking to see the conversation you just used to explain how you knew about that box. It's not going to help. That usually means it's going to help me quite a bit." He rubbed his jaw. Then he unlocked his phone and handed it over. The first message from Melissa had come at 456. "Does Caroline know your mom moved her place card?" I read it twice. Then the next one, Daniel had responded, "Please don't get involved, Melissa. This is mean, Daniel. Just let Mom have her night. Caroline probably won't stay long." I stopped reading for a second. Neither of us said anything. Then I handed the phone back. "You knew." "I knew Mom was upset." "No, you knew she moved my place card." "I didn't know exactly what she was planning." "You knew enough." "Caroline, my dad's been gone 18 months. This is Mom's first big birthday without him. She's been emotional." I stared at him. So I didn't want some huge blow-up tonight. That was the sentence. Not the chair. Not Melissa. Not even Judith. That sentence. "You didn't want to blow up." I said. "Right. So you decided I'd be easier to hurt." He frowned. "That's not what I decided. You decided your mother's feelings had to be protected. You decided Melissa shouldn't say anything. You decided not to warn me. And apparently you decided I'd leave early enough that nobody would have to deal with me. That's not fair." I laughed once. It wasn't a happy sound. "Fair." He started pacing between the kitchen island and the refrigerator. "Melissa made it sound worse than it was. She said it was mean. She doesn't know everything that's happened between you and Mom. Apparently, she knows enough to recognize a missing chair." Daniel stopped. I hated what I was about to say because it was true. "Your ex-wife showed more concern for me tonight than my husband did." That landed. He looked away. For once, he didn't try to argue. I slept in the guest room. I wish I could tell you I lay there full of righteous certainty. I didn't. I lay awake until after 2, thinking about 8 years of marriage and wondering how many times I had mistaken Daniel's passivity for patience. There's a difference. One keeps the peace. The other just makes sure the same person pays for it. The next morning, my phone rang at 8:17. "Melissa." I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I thought fine. Apparently, she was the only person who had tried to warn anybody. I answered. "Hi, Caroline." "Yes, I'm sorry." No explanation, no build-up, just that. I sat at the kitchen table. For what? For last night. For sitting there, for not getting up when you came in. You didn't create that situation. I still sat there. I appreciated that she didn't dress it up. Melissa continued. "I texted Daniel because I saw your place card earlier." "I know." A pause. "He showed you." "Yes, good." There was something almost grim in the way she said it. Then she added, "There's something else." I looked toward the hallway. Daniel was still upstairs. But after you left, Judith was furious. That part one can imagine. Not about you leaving. I already knew where this was going. The gift. Yeah. Melissa lowered her voice, though I had no idea where she was calling from. She kept asking Daniel what you brought. Then later when dessert came out, she started talking about the cabin. I sat straighter. What did she say? She said once everything was finally sorted out, she was going to find out what the place could bring. My fingers tightened around the phone. She told me in writing she wasn't selling. I know. You know, Judith told everybody she wanted to keep it in the family. That's why what she said last night stood out. What exactly did she say? Melissa hesitated. Then something like, if spring prices are good, I'd be stupid not to look. I got up and walked toward the spare bedroom. The gift box was still on the desk. I opened the drawer beside it and pulled out Judith's letter. August 3rd. Her words were plain enough. I have no intention of selling the cabin. I want it preserved for the family. I went back to the phone. Maybe she changed her mind. I thought that, too. Then Melissa said, except she said she'd already talked to an agent. I went very still. An agent? A realtor? She said she'd already asked what the place might be worth. I looked at the date again. August 3rd. Are you sure?
Yes.
Melissa paused. For what it's worth, Caroline? I don't think this is about a chair anymore. Neither did I. After we hung up, I called Susan Feldman. She answered on the fourth ring. Susan, it's Caroline Hayes. Good morning. I need you to tell me something before I do something stupid. That sounds promising. Despite everything, I smiled. I told her about the dinner, the box, Judith's comments, the realtor. Then I said the part one didn't especially want to admit. I'm angry enough right now that I want to tear those papers in half. Susan was quiet. Robert's words came back to me before she could answer. Don't use this to punish anyone. I closed my eyes. I need to know whether I'm protecting what Robert wanted, I said, or whether I'm just enjoying the chance to tell Judith. No. Susan's voice softened. That question is exactly why Robert chose you. I was afraid you'd say that.
I'm going to check something.
What the timeline? She called back just after lunch. Her first sentence changed the whole shape of the problem. Caroline Judith didn't change her mind after promising you anything. I waited. Susan continued. I found something dated 4 days later. Susan came by my office at 11 the next morning carrying a legal pad and a manila folder. That alone told me this wasn't going to be a cheerful conversation. We used the little conference room behind reception. My office manager, Denise, not Daniel's ex-wife, Melissa, because apparently God had decided I needed duplicate names in my life, stuck her head in and asked if we wanted coffee.
Susan said yes.
I said, make mine strong enough to reconsider my personality. Susan waited until the door closed. Then she opened the folder. First, the easy part. There's an easy part, the transfer. She tapped the paperwork. You signed it, but it was never delivered or completed through the trust. Robert's share is still controlled by the trust. I felt some tension leave my shoulders. So I can stop it. Not because Judith insulted you at dinner.
I know.
I'm saying that because if this gets ugly, somebody is going to claim exactly that. It already has. Susan nodded. Then we need to separate what happened Saturday from what happened before Saturday. She pulled out a printed email. At the top was the date, August 7th, for days after Judith had written to me saying she had no intention of selling the cabin. The subject line read Lake Cumberland Spring Market. I read the first paragraph, then the second. Judith had contacted a real estate agent in Kentucky asking for a rough valuation. She wanted to know what similar waterfront properties had sold for and whether spring would be a better time to list. One sentence made me read it twice. She wrote that she expected the remaining ownership issue to be resolved shortly. The remaining ownership issue is me, or more accurately, Robert's 25%. I set the email down. She knew. Susan nodded. At minimum, she was actively exploring a sale 4 days after telling you she intended to preserve the property. Can she say she was just curious? She can say whatever she likes. That sounded like Susan. What matters for you is Robert's instruction. You had reason to believe Judith intended to keep the cabin. Now you have reason to believe otherwise. I looked at the folder. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. What do I do? Do I do for now? Nothing. We don't complete the transfer. That's simple. Emotionally, no. Administratively, pretty much. I leaned back. Susan studied me for a moment. You don't look relieved. I'm trying to figure out how I became the villain. You were assigned a responsibility.
Tell my family that.
I suspect I'll get the opportunity. She was right. Rachel called before dinner.
She didn't bother with small talk.
Caroline, Mom says you're refusing to give her dad's share because of what happened at her birthday. That isn't why. She said you took the paperwork and walked out. I brought the paperwork. There's a difference. You know what I mean? I did, and I understood Rachel's position more than I wanted to. Judith was her 70-year-old mother. Robert was her dead father. Caroline was the sister-in-law holding documents nobody fully understood. From Rachel's side, I probably looked awful. Your mother told me in writing and that she was keeping the cabin, I said. 4 days later, she contacted a realtor. Rachel went quiet. Who told you that Susan found the email? Another pause. Then Rachel said, maybe Mom just wanted to know what it was worth. Maybe. You don't sound convinced. I'm not supposed to be convinced, Rachel. I'm supposed to follow your father's instructions. Her voice hardened. Dad wanted Mom taken care of. I know. That cabin is part of her life. I know that too. Then why are you making this harder? There wasn't an answer I could give that she was ready to hear. We ended the call politely. Sometimes polite is worse. Evan called 20 minutes later. He was 24 and normally stayed out of family disputes with the wisdom of somebody who had watched the adults exhaust themselves for years. Hey, Caroline.
Hey.
Grandma called me. Of course she did. He gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. Then I just don't want Grandpa's stuff turning into a war. Neither do I.
He wanted Grandma.
Okay, I know. Evan paused. I'm not saying what she did at dinner was right. There it was. The word but never actually came, but I heard it anyway. After we hung up, I stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce I no longer wanted. Daniel came downstairs with an overnight bag. I looked at it. Where are you going, Moms? I turned it off the burner.
Why?
She's alone. She's upset. And I'm what? That's not what I mean. Are you leaving because you think I'm wrong? He sighed. I just need everybody to calm down. I stared at him. You keep saying everybody when you mean me. Caroline, please. There it was again.
Please.
That little word Daniel used whenever he wanted me to make somebody else's behavior easier for him. He left. I ate 2 bites of pasta and put the rest in the refrigerator. The house got very quiet. And that was probably the lowest point of the whole thing because Susan had confirmed I had a legitimate reason not to transfer Robert's share. I had the email. I had the dates. I had Robert's instructions. And somehow I was sitting alone at my kitchen table wondering whether I was a vindictive woman using a dead man's trust to punish his widow. Anger can make you very certain in daylight. It gets less impressive around 11 at night. I pulled out Judith's signed statement again, then Robert's instructions. Don't use this to punish anyone. Use it to protect what I meant it to protect. I called Susan the next morning. She answered with everything okay. No, fair enough. I asked her one question. If Judith had given me the best seat in that restaurant Saturday night, bought me champagne, and told everybody I was the daughter she never had, would you still be telling me not to complete this transfer? Susan didn't hesitate. Yes. I closed my eyes.
Why?
Because of the email? Because of the dates? Because Robert's instructions don't change based on whether Judith is pleasant to you? I let out a breath. That's what I needed. That afternoon, Judith called. I'd like to resolve this, she said.
So would I.
If you give Susan permission to finish the transfer, I'm willing to forget what happened at my birthday. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it, then put it back. Judith, do you think your apology is something I have to buy? I didn't say apology. No, I said. You certainly didn't. She hung up. By Friday, Rachel had arranged what she called a family meeting at the cabin for Sunday afternoon. Judith wanted Daniel there. Rachel, Evan, several relatives, and me. My first answer was, no, I'm not walking into a room so 15 people can vote on whether I'm a terrible person. Susan said, you don't owe anybody a trial. Thank you. She waited, then added, but if you want to go, I'll come. I looked across my desk at her. Susan, that is alarmingly close to the nicest invitation I've had all month. So I agreed. By Sunday morning, I was convinced nearly everyone in that cabin would be against me. What I didn't know was that the one woman Judith had spent years using to make me feel replaceable had finally decided she was done being useful. The cabin looked exactly the same. That bothered me more than I expected. Same faded green shutters. Same cedar siding Robert had threatened to replace every summer for at least 10 years. Same crooked wooden sign beside the driveway that said Hayes Landing, even though there was no landing and nobody named Hayes had made that sign level. I parked behind Susan's Subaru and sat there for a moment. Through the front windows, I could already see people moving around. You ready? Susan asked when I got out. No good means you're thinking. That's a very lawyer answer. I charge extra for comforting ones. Inside there were about 15 people. Rachel stood near the fireplace. Evan was by the kitchen counter. A couple of cousins had come. Judith's younger sister was there. Daniel stood beside his mother. I noticed that immediately. He looked at me when I walked in. I looked away. The walls were covered with photographs. Daniel and Rachel as kids holding fish. Robert grilling in an apron that said license to grill, which he wore for 20 years despite everybody begging him to stop. Evan jumping off the dock at 12. That was the point of the cabin, not the market value. It held everybody's fingerprints. Judith waited until Susan and I sat down. Then she stood. I want everyone to understand why we're here. Susan leaned toward me. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. I know, Judith continued. Caroline is withholding Robert's last gift to me because she didn't like where I seated her at my birthday. I almost admired the efficiency of that sentence. She had reduced 4 years of trust to false promise and a realtor to a chair. Rachel looked uncomfortable. Evan stared at the floor. Judith said, I'm 70 years old. I just lost my husband, and now I'm being punished over a family disagreement. I waited until she finished. Then I asked, did you tell me in writing that you intended to keep this cabin? Judith frowned. This isn't a courtroom.
Good.
Then the question should be easier. Susan glanced down to hide what I suspected was a smile. Judith folded her arms. Yes, what date? I don't remember. August 3rd, if you say so. Susan opened her folder. I continued. 4 days later. Did you contact a realtor in Kentucky? The room changed. Not dramatically. People just stopped shifting around. Judith looked at Susan. I asked what the property was worth. Rachel turned toward her. You talked to a realtor. It was a conversation. You never told me that. Judith waved a hand because there was nothing to tell. Susan placed copies of the email on the coffee table. Rachel picked one up. So did Daniel. I watched him read the line about the remaining ownership issue.
His jaw tightened.
Judith said, knowing what your property is worth is not a crime. No one said it was, I replied. You're acting like I listed the place. No, that's why I called Susan instead of making the decision while I was angry. Susan took over. She kept it simple. Robert's share is still held by the trust. The transfer was prepared, but it was never completed. Under Robert's instructions, Caroline has an obligation to consider whether Judith intends to preserve the property for family use. Judith pointed at me. And what does she get? Susan looked almost puzzled. Nothing. Judith went quiet. Susan continued. Caroline is not a beneficiary of Robert's share. If the transfer isn't completed, the interest remains protected for the grandchildren. Evan finally looked up. For us, yes, that mattered. Not because Evan suddenly chose my side. Because for the first time, everyone understood I wasn't trying to get the cabin. Rachel was still holding the email. Mom, why did you promise Caroline you weren't selling and then ask about a spring listing 4 days later? I was exploring options. Then why promise? Judith's voice sharpened. Because I should never have needed Caroline's permission in the first place. There it was. Before anyone could respond, Melissa spoke from near the dining table. I think they should know about the birthday. Judith turned. I had barely noticed Melissa when I came in. She had stayed toward the back. This has nothing to do with you, Judith said. Melissa gave her a long look. That's kind of the problem, isn't it? Judith's face hardened. This is family business. Melissa almost smiled. You keep changing that definition depending on what you need. Nobody laughed. Not yet. Melissa looked at me. When I got to the restaurant, Caroline had a seat. I thought I'd misheard her. What? Your place card was there. Daniel turned around. Where beside you? The room went completely quiet. Melissa explained. She had arrived about half an hour early. The tables were already set. My name was printed on a place card beside Daniel. I saw it because I remember thinking maybe Judith really was trying to fix things. I looked at Judith. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Melissa continued. About 10 minutes later, Judith picked Caroline's card up. Rachel said why Melissa looked at her. She removed it. Then she looked at Daniel and she told me to move into Caroline's seat. Daniel stared at his mother. You moved Melissa there. Judith said nothing. Melissa went on. I assumed another chair was being added. Then I realized it wasn't. That's why I texted Daniel. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. Judith snapped Melissa after everything I'd done for you. Melissa's eyebrows went up. Judith, you seated me beside my ex-husband to insult his current wife. Let's not call that community service. Someone behind me snorted. Then Rachel laughed once to spite herself. Even I did. Judith did not. She turned to Daniel. Are you going to let them speak to me this way? I knew that question. Daniel knew it too. For most of our marriage, that was the moment he would have stepped in and tried to smooth everything over. Instead, he asked, Did you remove Caroline's place card? Judith stared at him. Daniel, did you? I was trying to make a point. What point? She hesitated, then finally said it. I wanted her to understand where she stood. Daniel looked down. When he looked back at me, he seemed older. I knew Mom was doing something with the seating. I said nothing. I knew enough to stop it before you got there. Judith interrupted. Daniel, don't. He shook his head.
No, Mom.
Then to me, I didn't stop it. That's on me. I appreciated hearing it. I also wasn't ready to make him feel better about saying it. Rachel turned toward Judith. I don't understand why you hate her this much. I don't hate her. Then what is this? Judith looked around the cabin. For the first time all afternoon, she seemed less angry than hurt. Your father trusted her. Nobody spoke. He trusted Caroline with this place, with decisions that should have been between him and his wife. I understood then, not excused. Understood, I said quietly. Robert trusted me with one decision. He should have trusted me. There was real pain in her voice. But pain doesn't automatically make the next thing you do acceptable. Maybe that hurt you, I said. But being hurt doesn't give you permission to decide who counts as family. Judith looked at me. So this is what you wanted? You wanted to win?
No.
I stood and picked up my coat. I came to your birthday intending to give you exactly what you wanted. Her eyes flickered. I wanted a chair, Judith. I paused. You turned it into the rest. Nobody had anything useful to add after that. Outside, I walked toward my car. A few seconds later, the cabin door opened. Daniel came out. He didn't ask me to go back inside. He didn't tell me his mother was upset. He just stopped a few feet away. I'm sorry. I looked at him, and I believed him. That was almost the problem. I believe you are. Relief crossed his face too quickly. So I added, that doesn't mean we're okay. This time, he didn't ask me to make it easier. He just nodded. Daniel and I drove home separately. That seemed appropriate. He pulled into the driveway about 5 minutes after I did, but neither of us tried to finish the conversation in the kitchen that night. There wasn't much left to say that would improve with exhaustion. For the next week, we were polite. Painfully polite. Do you need anything from Kroger? No thanks. Trash goes out tonight. I know. We sounded like two people sharing a duplex. Then Daniel came home one evening and put a business card on the kitchen counter. Marriage counselor. I looked at it. You called this morning. I was surprised. Daniel had always considered counseling something people did after a marriage was already halfway into a moving truck. When Thursday at 6, if you'll go, I picked up the card. I'll go. Counseling did not produce miracles. I mentioned that because people like to tell these stories as though one good apology repairs years of bad habits. It doesn't. For the first few sessions, Daniel kept referring to Judith's birthday as his mistake. Finally, during our third appointment, I stopped him. It wasn't a mistake. He frowned. What do you mean? A mistake is forgetting to pick me up at the airport. This was a habit. Our counselor asked me to explain, so I did. Christmas photographs, brunches, money, the birthday dinner. Every time Judith crossed a line, Daniel had turned to me because I was the person most likely to cooperate. Daniel sat with that for a while. Then he said something I still remember. I kept asking you to be the bigger person because you were the person I knew wouldn't punish me for it. I looked at him. There it is. He nodded. He wasn't proud of it. That mattered more to me than another apology. Things improved slowly. Then about 6 weeks later, Daniel slipped. Judith called him about the cabin. She wanted him to persuade Rachel that keeping the property and trust was unnecessary. She still believed that if Daniel and Rachel applied enough pressure, I would eventually give in. Daniel told her he would see what he could do. Then, he didn't tell me about the call. I found out from Rachel. She called one Tuesday evening and said, "Just so we're clear, I'm not changing my position because Mom sent Daniel after me." I was standing in the laundry room holding one of Daniel's shirts. Daniel did what there was a long silence. "Oh," Rachel said. That one word told me everything. When Daniel came home, I didn't yell. I was too disappointed to yell. "Did your mother call you about Rachel?"
He stopped.
"Yes." "When were you planning to tell me?" I wasn't hiding it. I waited.
He sighed.
Okay, I was.
Why?
I didn't want another fight. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after all those counseling sessions, we had somehow arrived back at the same sentence, wearing a different jacket. "You're still hiding problems and calling it peace." I know. No, Daniel. Knowing after I catch you isn't the same as knowing before you do it. He sat down at the kitchen table for a minute. Neither of us spoke. Then he took out his phone. "What are you doing?" Something I should have done the first time. He called Judith on speaker. She answered quickly. "Daniel, Mom, I need to clear something up." Her tone changed when she realized I could hear. He told her he wasn't going to pressure Rachel. He wasn't going to pressure me. And she could not ask him to keep conversations from his wife anymore. Judith was silent. "Then so Caroline is listening." Daniel looked at me. "Yes, of course she is, Mom." "What?" "That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about." Judith hung up. Daniel stared at the phone. "How'd that feel?" I asked. "Awful."
Good.
"Means you actually did it."
He laughed. So did I.
It was the first time we'd laughed together about his mother in weeks, without the joke being a way to avoid the problem. The cabin issue settled more quietly. Robert's 25% remained in trust for Evan and the other grandchildren. Daniel and Rachel both told Judith they wouldn't support selling. Without their cooperation and without Robert's share, Judith finally stopped pushing the idea. Susan handled the paperwork. I did what Robert had asked me to do, nothing more. I didn't get a piece of the cabin. I didn't get money. I didn't want either. That mattered to me because for a while I had worried that anger had contaminated every decision I made. It hadn't. Anger had simply made me look harder at a promise Judith had already broken. Judith and I didn't speak for almost 3 months. Then the Monday before Thanksgiving, my phone rang at work. Her name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it go. I answered. "Hello, Carolyn." "Judith." She cleared her throat. "I'm setting the table for Thursday." I waited. "Are you and Daniel coming?" That surprised me. Not the invitation. The fact that she asked me.
Depends.
I could almost hear her regretting the phone call. "There's a place for you." I looked out my office window. At the grown-ups table, there was a very long silence. Then Judith said, "Don't push it, Caroline." I laughed, and I could swear she almost did, too. That wasn't an apology. Judith never became the kind of woman who sat you down, took your hands, and listed everything she'd done wrong. Life doesn't always provide those people. Sometimes you get a slightly less difficult version of the same person and have to decide what boundaries make that workable. We went to Thanksgiving. My place card was beside Daniel's. Melissa was across the table with Evan. Judith did not make a speech about reconciliation. Nobody applauded. We ate turkey. Rachel complained that the mashed potatoes needed salt. Daniel dropped cranberry sauce on his shirt. It was wonderfully ordinary, and I think ordinary was what I'd wanted all along. For years, I'd been told some version of the same thing.
Keep the peace.
She's just difficult. She's getting older. Don't ruin the holiday. Be the bigger person. There is nothing wrong with choosing peace. The mistake is assuming peace always requires the same person to surrender. I used to think being reasonable meant making myself easier to deal with. What I had actually done was make myself easier to hurt. Judith was right about one thing that night at her birthday. Where somebody puts your chair can tell you a lot about how they see you. But a chair and a place aren't exactly the same thing. Family isn't whoever gets to decide where you sit. Sometimes family is the person who notices when somebody quietly takes your chair away. And if nobody notices, Eventually, you have to notice for yourself. I spent 4 years waiting for Judith to make room for me. At 47, I finally understood I was allowed to stop asking if you've ever been called difficult simply because you finally drew a boundary. I'd be interested to hear what happened. And if stories about ordinary people learning when enough really is enough means something to you, stay with me. Hey, I've got another story for